Punchy, snappy drums are like a great cake, and reverb is like the icing. Do I use too many food metaphors? Today I'm going to teach you all about reverb on drums, and by the end you'll be so good, Phil Collins will call you for advice. Hey, if you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe and ding the little bell to get notified every time I post a new video. Today we'll talk about 2 different ways to use reverb for live drums. We'll walk through most of the controls on the reverb, and I'll even show you a little bit of extra processing you can do to take your reverb up a notch. But please use caution. You don't want the drums sounding like they're coming from another zip code. We're going to divide our approach into 2 different categories, one for just the snare drum and the other for the entire kit. Now you might be thinking, the entire kit? The kick drum? Don't you know anything? You're gonna muddy up your whole mix. Now, before you hit thumbs down and start typing out angry comments, hold on. I'm gonna show you how to make it not muddy. Now, putting reverb on your entire drum kit makes a whole lot more sense if you're in an environment where the drums are isolated. When they're not isolated, there's already a lot of natural reverb just from the space that you're in. Even if your drummer is isolated, there can be some natural reverb coming through the speakers if you're in a live environment. But if you're in a pretty dead environment, acoustically speaking, I really hope you're not having church in a cemetery. That would be a little bit morbid. Then an overall kit reverb can make it sound more natural. The thing I'm trying to accomplish here is a texture or a feeling on the drums. I'm not really trying to make them sustain forever. I usually keep this reverb time around 1 second or less, and I only mix it in so much so that I miss it more when it's gone than hear it when it's there. Alright, now you can let out all those angry comments. Here's how I avoid making the kick drum muddy up the reverb. I put a high pass filter on the reverb send, so before the signal gets to the reverb, I've already taken care of that low rumble. Even if your console just has a low shelf for the reverb send, that works too. I roll up my high pass filter between 4 and 600, which is pretty high, but really all I want exciting the reverb is that mid-range and upper mids. The other thing that I do on my reverb send is I roll down the low pass filter between 4 and 2K. This keeps it from being too bright and it pushes it back in the mix just a little bit more. Now, if you listen to the reverb send dry, it sounds pretty filtered and nasty, but into the reverb, it cleans up a lot of that space. All right, now let's talk about snare reverb. When it comes to setting the time on your snare reverb, I like to use a half note. The snare's usually hitting on the 2 and the 4, so there's a half note between hits. Hopefully you've dampened your drum well enough so that it's not ringing a bunch, and then you have the control to pick how long you want the snare to sound based on the reverb time. So to get the reverb time for a half note, we take the tempo of the song and divide it by 120. This gives us a starting place, and we can decide if we like it that long or if we want it shorter or longer. From there, I might cut it in half so that I just get a quarter note on the reverb. But it's really up to you for what feels good for your space, your drum, and your song. The thing I really try to dial into is how it makes the groove feel. Is the reverb cluttering things up, or is it giving it a little more connectedness? Now, in the middle of a set, you're probably not changing reverb times on your snare drum between songs. So sometimes you just have to dial it into a happy medium and do what fits best for your space. Now, we talked about using high and low pass filters on our whole kit reverb, but I'll do it for the snare drum as well. Although in 2019, snare reverbs have gotten a little bit brighter, so you might not want to roll the low pass filter so far down. All right, now let's dive into the parameters of the reverb. The different types of reverb are modeled on different spaces. Halls, plates, rooms, chambers, churches, cathedrals. I mean, the list goes on and on. But if you can change the reverb time to make the hall be as long as the cathedral and the room to be as long as the church, what's the real difference with these? But before we do that, let's head over to the Nerd Zone so that you can learn about the different types of sounds that you're hearing so you can define these parameters a little bit better. Hi, welcome to Nerd Zone. I'm James Attaway. Today we're going to learn about the 3 different types of sounds that you hear in an acoustic space. The first sound you hear is the direct sound. It's the one that goes straight from the sound source to your ears. The second sounds that you hear are the early reflections. These are the ones that bounce off the wall once or twice and then reach your ear. Finally, all those sounds bounce around and dissipate and arrive at your ear at such a close time to one another that you perceive it as one sound called reverb. Since the sounds are traveling over a longer path, and sound travels at about 1130 feet per second, it takes more time for these other reflections to arrive at your ear. This sound energy dissipates over time, and that's what makes your reverb tail disappear. As the original energy decreases by 60 decibels, or we can't really hear it anymore, that's what we call RT60, or the reverb time. And now we've returned to nerd levels that are safe for everyone. All right, you made it back from Nerd Zone. Good job. Let's dive back in. When you choose a bigger space for your reverb type, the early reflections are going to be further apart. And if you choose a smaller space like a room or a chamber, the early reflections are going to be quicker and closer together. Your brain is an audio supercomputer that can tell a lot about the space that you're in just by what the reflections are like. And the type of these reflections and how close or far they are give us different feelings of different spaces. There's actually a bunch of science about early reflections and how they make people feel different things about the space that they're in. But I ain't going there. We've nerded out enough for one day. Now, plates and springs are an oddity, and I never really use spring reverb because it just sounds boingy. Why would you want that? The plate, on the other hand, is an artificial reverb. They actually made large metal plates and put a contact transducer on it and fed the signal into that transducer and then put piezoelectric transducers on either side of that plate. Now, just because it's not natural doesn't mean it's not good. I mean, Cheetos are good. Have you ever picked a Cheeto off a Cheeto tree? That would be really interesting. Pre-delay is the short time gap between when the original signal starts and when the reflections come in. If reverb pushes something back in the mix, pre-delay pushes the reverb back, giving it a little bit more isolation. Now, where it gets really fun is you can time the pre-delay to be a rhythmic element with the drums. You can set the pre-delay time to a 16th, 32nd, or 64th note. It gives the snare hits just a little bit of slap or echo feeling. It's amazing when you get it dialed in right. Check out different pre-delay times in this groove. Now, another control is diffusion. Diffusion is how smooth or coarse the reflections are in the reverb tail. But simply put, the further you are from the speakers, the less diffusion you want. If you have the diffusion turned up too much, it's going to feel washed out and really distant because it's adding in with the reverb that's in the room as well. So if you're mixing for a live stream, you can turn up that diffusion a little bit more. But if you're in a big space, you'll want to dial that diffusion back a little bit. Now, compression can change the shape of the drum reverb, and it can do a couple different things. It can get the initial part of the reverb out of the way so that that drum hit is dry and in your face, and then the reverb tail comes up at the end. It can have a similar effect as pre-delay without sounding quite as drastic. You can use a pretty fast attack and release on this compression, but if you slow down your release, you'll actually push up the end of that tail a little bit more, and that might make it more interesting for you. Now, gated reverb is definitely a signature sound of the 80s, but 80s sounds are kind of back in style, and I am not complaining about it. A gated reverb lets you have a nice thick reverb, but it doesn't have to go on forever and ever. It sustains out and then the gate cuts it off. Timing the hold and the release to the quarter note of the song can really help give it that fat sound for just a second without it having to drown. Now, fine-tuning the threshold is really tricky, but it's fun once you get it done. Hey, thanks for nerding out with me today. Comment below to let me know what your favorite albums are for drum reverb sounds. Click subscribe, hit like, and share this with a friend, and we'll see you back here next time. Hey, you, have you watched this tutorial yet? You should really watch it.